Joining me now is Spectator writer and president of the Australian Jewish Association, David Adler. Now, David, great to see you. There have been awful news this evening. Just an hour or so ago, we learned that there have been twin blasts in Jerusalem, which have killed at least one person, injured 18 more people. It's the first bomb attack on civilians in several years. 2 bus stops were targeted during the morning rush hour. David, what's the latest? What do we know about this atrocity?
Well, you're pretty well across it, Rowan. The only things that I can add is that it appears that these were moderately sophisticated bombs, that they were remotely detonated, and the technique was to leave a bag at the bus stops. The bags were filled also with shrapnel, marbles and bits of metal and bolts and nails and that sort of thing. So there are buses where the shrapnel holes are visible. A young 16-year-old Israeli boy by the name of Arya has been killed, and there are around 20 people that have been injured, some of them quite seriously. The big issue here, of course, is that we've just had an election in Israel where a right-wing government led likely by Bibi Netanyahu will be put together shortly. And one of the dominant issues has been terrorism and security. So often we see people in Western countries, commentators, making judgments comfortably from their armchairs in safe environments. When you're actually facing terrorism, when you're surrounded by jihadists, when there's people that are willing to act as suicide bombers or martyrs, it puts a different perspective on your worldview. And I think this is a huge issue, and it reminds us very vividly of some of the challenges that are being faced in Israel and Israeli society.
Well, David, it's not only in Israel. 2 people have been arrested in New York after the alarm was raised over Twitter posts in which they threatened to attack a synagogue. The charges against them include possession of a weapon, so we know that the threat was very real. These 2 were caught because they were posting publicly, as I said, on social media, that they intended to shoot up a synagogue. So this is New York. What's your response to that?
It's well, fortunately, they're not the smartest tools in the shed, because they sort of broadcast publicly what their intent was, and we have seen a dangerous elevation in the incidence of anti-Semitism in the US and elsewhere. It seems to be an ugly worldwide trend. Recently, the director of the FBI was giving evidence at a Senate committee, and he said quite bluntly and quite candidly that Jews are currently copping it from all sides: the extreme left, the extreme right, the Islamists. It's becoming a dangerous environment, and of course, the availability of weapons in the US means that we have seen murders in synagogues. We've seen shootings in synagogues. And fortunately, on this occasion, it looks like the authorities were able to intervene and prevent another one.
Now, you mentioned Bibi Netanyahu, who, as you know, I had the pleasure of meeting when he was out here. He and Trump made a formidable team. Ron DeSantis, we've spoken on the show about the Trump-DeSantis. Who's it going to be? I'd love it to be both of them. That's my position. And then DeSantis to follow in 4 years' time. We shall see. But Ron DeSantis, one of the big issues which Netanyahu, of course, brings the spotlight to, or the global spotlight to, is Judea and Samaria. Ron DeSantis has very clearly come out speaking just a couple of days ago. His view, have a listen to this, David, where he's talking about the question of whether Judea and Samaria are occupied, which is the Palestinian left-wing point of view, or just disputed, which is the more common sense and realistic point of view. Have a listen.
We are not going to allow the universities in the state of Florida to become hotbeds of anti-Jewish sentiment like they have all across this country. We were the first statewide elected official to do public events in Judea and Samaria, because we understand history. We know those are thousands of years of connection to the Jewish people, and I don't care what the State Department says. They are not occupied territory. It is disputed territory. And you got to know the history.
You got to know the history, David. Now, I'm not going to ask you to give us the whole history because we'd still be here till tomorrow morning. But what's he specifically referring to, and what was your reaction to that?
Well, I'm going to say something just preliminary, because within the last half hour I was talking to a member of the Knesset who has legislation prepared for the extension of sovereignty into Judea and Samaria. So that's I guess an exclusive.
Exclusive, fantastic. Happy to take it, David. Thank you.
Anyone who knows anything about history, and they can see it physically, you can go into Judea, Samaria, into the city of Hebron. You can stand next to the tomb of Abraham, of Sarah, of Isaac, of Rivka. 6 of the 7 great patriarchs and matriarchs are buried there. So we have close to a 4,000-year history physically evidenced in Judea, Samaria. It's interesting that people who have real values, who understand the basis of Western civilization, who recognise the value of the Judeo-Christian foundations, whether you're religious or not, that's not the issue, but at least you recognise the value of those principles. They tend to recognise this. They tend to recognise and support Israel, the land of Israel. Those that want to undermine Western civilization, who are leaning towards socialists or Marxism or whatever, tend to do the opposite. So it's wonderful to see someone of the status and clarity and moral principles of Ron DeSantis come out with those statements. I would be delighted if he continues to champion those values, and whether he gets to the White House in 2024 or 2028, that's a decision for the American people, of course, but we wish him every success.
Absolutely. David Adler, thanks so much for joining us this evening.